embrace God first. And my suggestion to people is, like, if you're not fully embracing God first and you say you're on the divine love path, then you're not humble yet. Because once you fully embrace God first, you'll find all of these other aspects of your life get challenged, and that's fantastic. They need to be challenged, and they need to be released, and we need to be in a humble place where we allow all that to happen.
Absolutely. And willingness to feel all of the emotions about being alone, being attacked, being belittled, just to be ourselves.
Just to be ourselves.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind that when we feel our emotions in a truthful manner, we are being ourselves. Even if those emotions are injured, we're still being ourselves much more than we were when we were in the facade.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay, there's a few things you've listed that we would never do if we were, in this wholehearted desire to feel and experience everything. So the first one is that we would never attempt to use methods or techniques that shut down or dampen our emotional experience.
Yes, I see a lot of people in spiritual persuasions constantly trying to use techniques that are all about trying to reprogram their emotions, really. And they don't want to just feel the emotion that's present. They want to try to transform it into something different. And they use all of these techniques. And some of these techniques are intellectually based, some of them are fear-based, and some of them are almost religious belief system based, in the sense that a belief system is created to manage the emotion. So, for example, you see in many forms of religion, a belief system that God is an angry God is created to manage an emotion. And the emotion is this emotion of, I feel like I'm going to get punished when I have a relationship with God, and I feel like that's what God wants to do, and so I want to believe in a punishing God. I want God to punish other people, so therefore I have to believe in a punishing God for that to occur. These are all emotions that I would give up if I actually experience my own emotions in a humble manner. But instead of doing that, I create a whole series of belief systems that support my emotional injury. And we would never choose to do that if we were truly humble.
Yeah, and I think of really practical things in my day-to-day life that I do to dampen down my emotional experience, Sometimes it's having a hot cup of tea. Dependent on, sometimes when I have tea it's not about that, but, often I catch myself trying to soothe myself rather than feel the rawness of my experience.
To calm oneself down. To make people, quite often it's the times when we get out of control that we get close to our emotions, and yet you see people trying to get back into control. Also, you often see them using food as a main way to get back in control, or you see them engaging, like avoiding certain types of people to get things back in control. A person who's humble doesn't do any of those things. A person who's humble just feels the feeling first. Before any of those things, so they know why they're going for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, or they know why they just walked around that side of the street when they saw the other person coming. They know because they can feel the emotion. They can feel the emotion that they're trying to avoid.
And I suppose there's stages, isn't there? Like, I used to do all those things in automatic. Now I'm aware of the emotion,
but still doing them.
Often still doing them. Sometimes I go, no, I'm going to just go for real humility here. So true humility, I wouldn't even consider them anymore. I would just be fully embracing everything.
Yeah, so you'd see someone who you're afraid of walking down the street towards you, and you might still feel fear. Because that might still be an emotion in you, but you would walk towards them and engage the situation.
And often I find now it's when things like that happen, I think, here's God answering my prayer to deal with my fear. Yep, thanks God. Now I feel afraid. This is your gift to me, really. I kind of have that feeling. I'm still terrified sometimes.
And it's remarkable how many people are not humble in their prayers, because we often pray for God to show us something. God shows us something or creates a circumstance that shows us something, and we go out of our way to avoid it. And therefore we're going out of our way to be arrogant. Because if we were truly humble, we'd embrace it. We'd go, well, God, you're a pretty lovely guy. You've just sent me another situation to challenge myself and help myself become more humble and feel more of my emotion. And if I can embrace this situation, it's going to be wonderful. And it's such a loving God doing that for us all the time. And yet what we do instead, oftentimes we go, oh, my law of attraction is really bad. Why does this law of attraction be so bad? And we hear people say this all the time. And the reason why they're saying that is because they are still used to managing humility. They're trying to have a facade of humility. If you have to manage your life, then there's a facade of humility.
Yeah.
A person who's humble doesn't need to manage their life. They just embrace their life fully, allow everything to get triggered that gets triggered emotionally, and they come out of the other side purified.
Yeah. And, as you talk about it, I smell the freedom in it.
Yeah.
It just smells like freedom. Just feel everything, be where you are, embrace every experience that's there.
Yeah.
And yet, as I live this day to day, the fear, the terror, really, let's say, there's terror in me.
Well, one of the first emotions that a person needs to get over with regard to humility is terror. So being humble enough to experience your terror, if you're humble enough to experience your terror, you will be humble enough to experience most other emotions.
Yeah.
But what I see most people doing with their terror is they avoid it or manage it. And so therefore they are not humble enough to experience their terror. And as a result of that, they'll only selectively be humble with other emotions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I've been praying for a week about fear. And, okay, God, let's do this fear thing. And I've had a couple of opportunities to, confront fear. And this morning I woke up you touched a spot on my back and I was in utter terror.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where real humility is tested, isn't it? Because I go, okay, I want fear, but I don't want terror.
Yeah, exactly.
This is too much. I don't understand how to feel this. This feels out of control. I don't even physically know what it's not coming to me what it's about. It's just a visceral feeling.
And if you were passionately humble, what would you? You'd get up, you'd sit up, you'd start writing about the terror
Whatever
in your life and the terrifying events in your life about man, and you would just immediately you would do that if you're humble. You wouldn't wait for another person to encourage you to do it. You wouldn't wait for me to create the right space for you to do it. You would just automatically embrace that particular process, because that is what being humble means.
Yeah.
Most people are yet to arrive at that place.
Yeah.
Most people who I know or who I've met who claim to be on the path towards God, whether they're on so-called the divine love path or any other religious path, have yet to be that humble. And I see that happening in day-to-day life all the time, where an emotion of terror is exposed, and almost every person I've ever met, when it's an emotion of terror is exposed, that's when true humility is tested. And most people do not have the humility to actually go through that emotion of terror. So terror is an interesting test of our humility.
Yeah. Okay, and there's a few other things we would never do. We'd never get angry, resentful, or afraid about having to feel our own emotions.
Yeah, so we wouldn't be rageful at God about the law of attraction and what it's brought us today. And really, when you think about it, it's not the law of attraction that brought us that particular thing. It's the unhealed soul emotional condition that's brought us. So it's something inside of ourselves anyway. But we wouldn't have this tendency to blame externally everything. A person who's truly humble looks firstly at themselves. They don't blame the external environment or situation first. They always look at themselves, and a part of looking at themselves is looking at the situation, but they don't avoid the situation or themselves in the process.
Yeah, I found some old journals of mine the other day, so from 4 years ago, and it's full of this resentment and rage at God, this system, and it's just
quite a lot of it back then, wasn't it?
Because you were presenting me with humility or with truth, and my humility was non-existent. So there was a lot of that, and a lot of this next point, which is I was feeling like I'm giving up on things or losing things because of choosing this path. And when I'm really humble, I would never feel either of those things. And 4 years later, I'm happy to say I feel the complete opposite. I feel everything has been gifted to me through this path.
Yeah.
But that's been that's developed as my humility's developed.
If you look at this whole aspect of feeling that you're losing things, that means, if you look at it truthfully, that means that you believe that you've got things. to lose,
Yeah.
right? And that to me is a pretty remarkable proposition, considering that when we begin our process towards God, we're totally removed from God generally, and yet we believe we've got things, and in my mind and in my heart, my feelings are it's impossible to have anything without God.
Yeah.
So bearing that in mind, this whole concept that I'm giving things up, like, I'm giving up caffeine, or I'm giving up alcohol, or I'm giving up eating meat, what a sacrifice, and all of these ideas of sacrifice, they're all based around emotional injuries that a humble person would just feel, and a truly humble person doesn't feel all the time a resistance to giving things up.
Yeah.
Because they know that everything, like if your relationship again with God is the highest priority, then what are these other things in comparison? And one of the things we're not understanding at that point is that actually if I embrace my relationship with God, everything, every beautiful thing comes to me. My whole life will be enhanced in ways that I at this point in time cannot even imagine. And I need to have at least some faith in that concept.
Yeah, and that's what it feels like to me. I was trying to hold on to things that didn't have a substance. They're like sand now.
And they weren't even real, many of them. Like holding on to the good opinion of another person, when in reality you didn't have the good opinion of the other person.
I was working for it all the time.
You're working for it all the time.
Yeah.
And the reality is, if you have the good opinion from another person, you would never lose it through you doing something that challenges them. And in fact, doing something wouldn't challenge them if you had their good opinion. So the reality is we get a lot of things challenged as we get closer to God.
And that's been a beautiful gift for me, is that when I've decided to risk what's felt like a risk, to be humble and risk loss, my perceived loss, I've seen what wasn't real anyway, and I've seen what actually did have substance, and
Yes.
I oftentimes wasn't aware of it, like relationships that actually had some substance.
Yeah.
Which I kind of, everything was on a level playing field, except maybe when I was in more addiction with people, I valued that relationship more
Than the relationships that had substance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when I've just decided to strive to be more myself and go for my relationship with God, those addictive relationships, a lot of them fell away very rapidly, and I was left looking at people who had actually seen something in me that I hadn't even seen, or who respected my difference just as much as they enjoyed.
And really, in a way,
similarities.
they are the people who saw you more as you truthfully are than saw the facade.
Yeah.
And so therefore they saw more of your real self, and therefore often we reject those people who see more of our real selves because we're not humble enough to accept that self that they see.
So true, isn't it? But this is why I feel like it feels so much like a risk or a loss, when actually now the beautiful truth is it's a gift, and now I see things with a totally different.
People don't understand how hard maintaining a facade actually is.
It's exhausting.
Like I just see people with their lives like exhausting themselves. I quite often liken it to juggling 9 balls, and that's what they're doing in their life. They're juggling. How does that person see me? How does this person see me? How does my family perceive me? How does my friends perceive me? Oh, I've dropped that ball. I better pick that up while I'm still juggling these other 8 balls, and then throw them back into the mix. And their whole life is so busy juggling everything, juggling all their work, their workmates and how they perceive them, all their friends and how they perceive them, their family, how they perceive them, their children even, and how they perceive them, and how they perceive themselves, all in the facade. And I just say, you just need to stop juggling and just drop all the balls. That's what humility does. Humility says, no, you don't have to juggle anything anymore. You just need to feel why you're juggling everything. That's all you need to do. And once you get into that place, you're willing to feel, you're willing to drop all the balls. The only reason why we keep all the balls up, juggling them, is because we're unwilling to drop a perception of ourselves that we wish to retain. And we have no hope of accepting God's perception of ourselves in this state. to set God's perception of ourselves, we're going to have to drop every perception that we imagine or feel from our environment or from ourselves. We're going to have to drop all of those perceptions, and a truly humble person is willing to do that.
Yeah.
And then just let it all be a mess on the ground, and then start seeing which bits are, what God created, and which bits are just the facade or the injury that we need to release.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's our first point was really about God's love flowing into our heart, being dependent on a wholehearted desire to feel and experience everything, all emotions.
So we're really talking about the wholehearted desire to feel everything.
Yes.
So that's the main point of that section.
Yeah.
We need to develop within ourselves a wholehearted desire to feel everything, not I'll do it if I have to, or I suppose I have to, the law of attraction is bringing me the event, or being resistive all the time, but rather a passionate desire to do it.
Yeah, which is so beautiful, isn't it?
Yep.
But it does take work to develop that from where we are in our injured state.
And it also takes a desire to release every perception we have of ourselves and every addiction we have of other people perceiving ourselves a certain way.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so hard to do. And that's why humility is one of the reasons why humility is difficult, as we'll talk about later.
Yeah, yeah.